Welcome to today's episode of The Science of Turning Back Time, and I'm joined by Bryan Hardy, who is a men's holistic nutrition, health and nutrition coach. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
So, very welcome and thanks for joining me. You mainly coach men, so I'm just wondering, what are we going to say to the lady listeners that are on the call today?
Yeah. Well, certain principles are certainly universal, right? So it's not like these things are exclusively for men, although some things will be more targeted towards them. But really, it's to listen in. If you have a brother, a father, a husband, a son, a man in your life who is not feeling his best, who's maybe struggling to feel well, then perhaps you can listen with him in mind, or send him this after you listen to it. Yeah, it would be so appreciated, and I'm sure he would appreciate it. And it also gives, and I feel the same way when I learn things about women's health and hormonal cycles and reproductive cycles. It gives me a deeper appreciation for what they're going through, just in general. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a health nerd and I find that stuff interesting, but I think it's beyond that. It's just good to know some of the things that the opposite gender is dealing with. I think that's just healthy for all of us to be aware of.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think there's such a big focus and emphasis on women's health and hormones these days. There's a ton of information, lots of emphasis on perimenopause and menopause. And I think sometimes men get forgotten a little bit along the way in terms of some of those hormonal changes as well. So today, really, lots of what we want to be talking about is the kind of things that men face as well in terms of just general health and testosterone. But before we start, I think you've got quite a strong personal story of what brought you into doing the work that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for having me on. I think this is going to be a really, really fun discussion. So I'm excited. Yeah. To give people a bit of the backstory, um, I wasn't terribly into health growing up. I wasn't eating healthy food. I wasn't aware of you know, basic things like constipation. I was constipated my entire childhood. I didn't know. I thought that was normal. And so by the time I was 18, I ended up having a mosquito flying around my head. No, I ended up having a near-death experience that started when my appendix became very inflamed and then ended up rupturing and was missed at the first hospital that I went to. And so it festered and became very infected. And by the time I went to the second hospital and then they did surgery, opened me up, cleaned me out, really saved my life. And for that, I'm extremely appreciative. I would not be here if it weren't for emergency medicine. And in the recovery process from there, which was basically rebuilding my digestion and also learning to deal with scar tissue and the adhesions that would form in my intestines that would cause all kinds of problems down the line. And the Western medicine system had really no answers for those things, those more chronic internal issues that were to do with my digestion, that were to do with my recovery from their surgery. So it's like the antibiotics kept me alive. The doctors and nurses kept me alive, but they couldn't enable me or teach me in how to actually be well for life. And so to give a picture, about a year after that surgery is where I had terrible gut dysbiosis, just really, really bad imbalance of things, yeast overgrowth, candida overgrowth, cravings, intense cravings for all kinds of stuff, intense bloating with most of the food I was eating, just not able to digest much at all. And with that, as you might imagine, my brain kind of shut off. I didn't have the focus or the energy or the libido or the drive. And here I am at like 19 years old, feeling like I've just aged multiple decades and like something is clearly not right. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so that led me to see a naturopathic doctor who introduced me to the world of nutrition as medicine, right? As a primary tool for health recovery and reclamation and for, health or, disease prevention, right? Anti-aging, etc. And that just blew my mind and I was hooked. And that was back in about 2011. and I've been hooked ever since. And I've had some periods of, what some might call burnout, or, close to burnout, in my time since then, which has really showed me that many times I can't, at least for me, I can't just push the gas pedal and try to bear down and force my way through life,
Mm.
because my body's not going to, be able to sustain that. And I've seen that many and many times, where both for myself and for others, where that answer of like the old school macho idea of, just suck it up and push through and be tough, although useful in many situations, is not so useful when it comes to chronic health conditions and when it comes to preventing future issues. And so it's been a humbling journey. It's been an up and down journey for many years, to get myself to a place where I felt stable again, and I felt like, okay, I'm back in the driver's seat when it comes to my health. But it was not easy. It was not overnight, and it required a lot of experimentation and a lot of research to figure out what actually works when it comes to rebuilding after such an event, and then maintaining that for years and years to come.
Absolutely. And I mean, this podcast is primarily about health span and longevity. And so we talk a lot about, obviously in your case, a very acute situation, and very dramatic that you had to recover from. But I think a lot of the principles that you've probably put in place now will be there to lead you into a much healthier future. Talking about your next 20, 30 decades, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it really is amazing when you think about that kind of thing, right? And people look at like the blue zones, where they look at these places where there happen to be a lot of long-lived people, who tend to live well into their old age, not be stuck in hospitals and hooked onto machines, right? They're actually living into their old age. And so much of what they do is so common sense, right? They move a lot. Maybe they like to garden, or they hike, or they play tennis or something. They're not out there, trying to crush themselves. They're not out there typically stressing about their food, right? They're just eating simply. They're eating in a calm state. And so it's like, from learning from those examples, and then also seeing what, the research shows us, it becomes this really fascinating, adventure and experiment for each of us, because each of us, I really do advise people to see their life and see their health as a series of ongoing experiments,
Mm.
right? Where you're going to have a hypothesis, right? You're going to have an idea. Okay, something's not quite working. Let me try something, and then see how that goes, and then take notes, or take, feedback from that, and then reiterate and try again. Um, and so, yeah, when I think about, health span and longevity and youthful longevity, I think about, um, adopting that sort of experimenter's mindset, and always being curious, always tinkering, always experimenting, and being as light and fun as possible when it comes to these things, right? Bringing that sense of play into the conversation, and into our lives, I think, is really important. I think play is probably one of the like fountain of youth secrets for a lot of people. And if we're not intentional about it, it's very easy to not have that show up really much at all.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that kind of brings me to the next point that a lot of my patients will say, well, all this stuff is great, but it's boring. I want to be out
Mm.
with my friends socializing. I want to be having wine. I don't want to be thinking about food. And so what's your thoughts on that balance between, nutrition and getting it right, and also living a life that's not too restrictive?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's an art to it. There's certainly an art to it, and it reminds me, somewhat related. There was, back in 2018. I remember listening to a talk about kind of like global nutrition guidelines, and the speaker highlighted that, I believe it was Brazil. That in Brazil, it was the only country that, as part of their healthy eating guidelines, specified eating with friends and family. like cooking together, eating together, making food a social occasion. Because I've seen it and I've experienced it that, yeah, I could eat the not perfect food, right? Maybe it's pizza or it's whatever, fill in the blank of, what some people might consider not healthy or not super clean food. I could do that. And if I do that from a place of love and connection and no stress and just enjoying my time with whoever I'm with, I tend to digest that food a whole lot better than if I'm going at it from some like guilt ridden place or shameful place of like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this, but I'm going to eat it anyways. And just kind of scarfing it down in an emotional um, kind of way versus, no, this is just what we're having as part of our time together. And so I think there is a fine balance in certain cases. And for certain people, you will have to have a hard line in the sand, right? If you want to feel your best, there are going to be cases, situations, and individuals where you're going to be best served to just strictly not have any of that thing, right? Like if you're sensitive to certain foods, like for me, I know dairy doesn't tend to agree with me very well, even if it's raw, unpasteurized, whatever, still doesn't tend to agree with me. So I'm not going to make that like a staple food, right? I'm not going to make that something I have every single day. I've worked with other people who they're sensitive to gluten, and I don't know if it's exactly the gluten or if it's the glyphosate residue that's found on those grains. I think it's more likely the glyphosate residue that's so problematic. Um, but it's just not wise for those people to make a habit of consuming that stuff on any kind of regular basis, or in some cases, even at all. Right? If
Yeah.
someone has like autoimmune sensitivities or predisposition, that could send them into an episode that could last days or weeks, depending on where their immune system is at. And so you need to know yourself. What are your tolerances? How much can you kind of play in the gray area and still feel good? Um, and what is your highest value? Is your highest value being as healthy as possible, or is your highest value, time with friends and family? Because I'm not here to try to convince someone to shift their core values, but if it's not working for you and you feel yourself after the occasion or after the time out with your friends, you feel yourself bloated, heavy, brain fogged, just not feeling great, then you just have to ask yourself and be honest, is it worth it? Right? Is it worth it? Then that also leads us to, the side sort of topic there or tangent, which is what can I do, whether through enzyme support, whether through binders like charcoal or chlorella or spirulina, etc. What can I do to mitigate the damage of whatever I might be consuming that my body would rather not consume, but that I'm going to consume anyways. And so charcoal for me becomes a really amazing strategy for if I've had something that I know I don't want my body to absorb, then I'm going to use charcoal to bind it up and pull it out of the system. And in some ways, it's almost like it never happened. I have mosquitoes landing all around me.
I
This is
can hear
wild.
them moving around.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get pulled out of my story. There we go. Um, this
Oh,
is what happens when you live in the rural side of Quebec and it's freshly spring, I guess, even though the windows are all closed, so they must be sneaking in somewhere. But either way, that piece that just to wrap on that, I'd love to hear your take on it is that using things like activated charcoal after a meal out, if you've had some gluten, you've had some alcohol, whatever it is, that for me can be a lifesaver and make me feel 10 times better the next day than if I don't have anything like that. If I just eat that stuff and leave my system to deal with it, I'm going to feel much more inflamed the next day than if I take some activated charcoal and a whole bunch of water and just flush that stuff through when I'm in a pinch.
absolutely. I like that. And it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? You want to, you know, try and keep things as unprocessed and as good and healthy as you can 80% of the time, and then relax it when you are with friends and you're in that community and social interaction as well. But you've mentioned brain fog a few times now. Does our diet or nutrition or gut, does it have anything to do with brain fog?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, in my experience, it has a lot to do. And so for people out there, for me, I didn't understand what was meant by the term brain fog until I went through it. And so if you've been blessed to never have gone through that, count yourself lucky. If you've had that for a long time, you might just think that's what normal feels like, right? Which is really unfortunate when we're in a place for so long that becomes our new baseline, and we forget what having a clear head and having clear energy and consistent energy was even like in the first place. And so, because the way I look at it, people talk about the gut being the second brain. Excuse me, the second brain, or the third brain if you consider the heart as well in that combination of highly neurologically dense areas in the body. And so the gut, when it has a healthy balance of bacteria and digestion is working and we're assimilating the things that we're eating, so much of our neurotransmitters, right? Our serotonin, our dopamine, our acetylcholine, all of these things have nutritional building blocks as part of their foundation, right? And so if we're not, first of all, consuming those building blocks and able to actually digest them and absorb them and assimilate them into our body, into our store of nutrients, then it's going to be nearly impossible for the brain to function as it's designed to function. When we have this, it's like we're stepping on the brake at the same time we're trying to accelerate, like we're getting in our own way. And we have this system, which if your gut is inflamed and you're not digesting, you're not absorbing what you're consuming, then it's going to be, you're going to experience a subpar kind of performance when it comes to your brain and your cognition. So yeah, it goes so far beyond just like, did I hit my head and have a concussion or something, right? Which could also lead to brain fog. If you had an actual brain injury, of course, we would expect the brain to be challenged in its performance. But things as simple, like I said, as having the wrong bacteria in your gut can lead to all kinds of issues in terms of your thinking and your mood, as well as basic things like, dehydration or sleep. And a lot of people are both dehydrated and sleep deprived, and that's kind of normal for them. And so you're asking your brain to perform against a very unsupportive set of conditions, which tends to lead to this, maybe your words aren't as easy to recall, or your memory's a little bit fuzzy, or you're forgetting names, or you walk into a room and you totally forget why you're going in there. All of these things can be part of an inflamed gut, which leads to an inflamed brain, which leads to suboptimal performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a lot of men that come in, not just men and women, but men that come in and say, I'm not unwell. I'm okay, maybe just have a little bit of bloating or whatever, but I'm just not able to perform the way I used to at work, or I just feel a little flat. And so, nothing majorly wrong, but just feeling a little under par. And I think very often when we do pull that back, it goes back to the gut. So you will see, kind of dysbiosis and things in the gut. But one thing I do really want to talk about is testosterone, because I have a lot of men that come in into my clinic who are, when we run their labs, they are a little low in testosterone. And so the question is it just a natural part of aging and we should just, men should just accept that's kind of, how it's going to be? Or are there things people or men can do in particular to help with that? Or what's your take on testosterone?
Yeah. So as you might imagine, I experienced episodes of imbalanced or non-optimal hormones in my early to mid 20s. And so it is important to be aware of these things. It is important to be measuring these things and to be assessing, is this part of the picture for me? Right? There's a whole range in terms of genetics, right? Some people are going to produce a lot of testosterone naturally, assuming nothing's getting in the way of that. Other people might not produce as much on a lab value, but it might not matter because functionally their body is responding to what they are producing in all the healthy ways that we would expect, right? So if someone can easily build muscle, they feel like they've got an internal drive, they've got a healthy libido, their brain feels clear, they're confident, they're courageous, they have all these characteristics that we might associate with someone with a higher testosterone or healthy testosterone. If they feel that way and have all those things, and their labs are a little bit on the low side, it's not really anything to be concerned about. But if they don't feel that way, if they are, as you describing, right, they've lost their edge, they've lost that sharpness, they've lost that spark, then yeah, we want to look deeper and we want to see what are all of the low hanging fruit that I would refer to them as, all the easy things, many times free things, absolutely free, just cost you a bit of time and energy. What are all those things that you could do that you're not doing, right? That are going to move you in the right direction. So this for me comes down to really lifestyle and nutrition and like stress management, right? So if you're not sleeping, your hormones are not going to be optimal. You know, that's just a very easy thing to look at initially, because hormone production usually happens. We get those surges of hormones while we're sleeping, assuming we're asleep at the right time and we're getting into deep sleep and really restorative sleep. Because if that's not happening, then good luck, having healthy hormones, healthy testosterone in this case. So is your lifestyle out of sync with what we would consider a more natural rhythm, right? So going to bed maybe a bit on the earlier side, waking up with the sun, getting lots of fresh air, lots of activity, lifting some heavy things every now and then, a few times a week, really, stressing and using your muscles and your bones and your tendons, because that can produce a testosterone effect, especially lower body exercises like squats and deadlifts. These things can produce a nice little release of testosterone. And then we look at the nutritional side, right? So if someone is deficient in things like magnesium, vitamin D, zinc, boron is a really cool one, because boron, which is a very inexpensive, very safe, mineral to supplement with, boron will liberate what testosterone you already have that might be bound up, right? So for people who aren't technically uh, savvy when it comes to these biological terms and so forth, there's certain proteins that will hold on to your hormones. And if they're holding on to those hormones are inactive. They're not able to actually reach the tissue and provide their effect. And so boron will help to liberate some of your testosterone from what's being bound so that it can actually be active, right? So there's some very key nutritional pieces that if you're not getting through food, which is hard to do at a therapeutic amount in today's world, and then if you're not getting in supplementation, any kind of vitamin and mineral support, then again, you're likely leaving yourself at a disadvantage when it comes to what your body could produce if it was just supported in the right way, and if it wasn't struggling to sort of manage the insufficient amount of nutrients that it's operating with, right? Because one thing to keep in mind is that sex drive and reproduction are not survival needs. And
Yeah.
so when your body is very stressed or you're deficient in certain nutrients, which is also a kind of stress, if your body is very chronically stressed, it's going to, as a way to preserve your life, to extend your life, it's going to reduce your sex hormones and reduce your sex drive and conserve that energy for survival needs. And so if you're barely surviving, and it makes sense, right? In a more traditional context, if you're barely surviving, right, there's barely enough food to get through the day, it's probably not the best time to reproduce, right? Because your offspring are going to be coming into this high stress kind of like, famine almost like environment. And it's going to be very hard for them to thrive. And so if you've noticed that that spark has kind of gone, I like to think of it as, okay, what is my body trying to tell me in this case? What does it need from me, right? Where am I overly stressed and I'm maybe not even aware of it? And then doing things to support the body, bring in those nutrients. And the last two I'll just share are, which tie back to this idea of nature connection, right? And so much of the common challenges we see could be seen as like a nature deficiency,
Yeah.
right? You're deficient in fresh air and sunshine and clean water. and, feeling connected to something big and beautiful, such as the natural world. And so if you are never getting outside, never getting sunshine, you are avoiding, things like even cold water, right? Like dipping yourself into cold water or taking a cold shower for 60 seconds, 90 seconds a day. Even that can produce a measurable effect when it comes to your testosterone production. I'm just going to take that guy out of there. So there's a lot we can do. That's just to say there's a lot we can do, and I'll mention at the end before I forget. I've got an entire free resource on this that walks guys through. So if this is sparking some things for you in terms of like, what are those things I can do? That you can find that at my website, and we'll share that later. But yeah, there is so much we can do before having to go and take like testosterone replacement therapy. There's a ton of things you can do, and all of those things together can produce really amazing results.
I agree completely with that. And, there is a place for testosterone replacement therapy. I think there are places where it has a massive impact, but you need to get all of these pillars sorted first. And very often things will resolve themselves when you do. So what I sometimes find is that when people are in a state of brain fog, maybe neurotransmitters are a little off, they're feeling a little low and a little flat, making change is actually quite difficult. So all of the things you've said make sense, and people will connect to that and go, you're absolutely right, I should be getting out more, I should be doing all of these things, but I just don't have the energy. So how do you make change when you're not feeling great? What are some of the tips you can give, and how people can go about making change?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's like the time when we need to do things is the time we least feel like doing them, which is a bit of like a cruel joke, right? By Mother Nature. It's like, okay, this is the time where it really matters what you do for your body, and you're not going to feel like it. And so how do we navigate that, right? Um, One thing that I often share with people, and myself too, is that the difference between an adult and a child, and this is by no means to um, talk down to someone who's dealing with like chronic fatigue or like Lyme disease or something where they actually have like zero energy and they're just trying to survive. I'm not talking to that extreme of a case right now. But many times we just don't feel like it. And it's like we have to ask myself the question, okay, one of the differentiators in my mind between a child and an adult is that a child, if they don't feel like it, they're probably not going to do it, right? They have to feel like it. They have to feel motivated. Whereas an adult, ideally, we have a degree of self-responsibility and logic to know, okay, even though I don't feel like it, I need to do this. Like this has to get done. I'm sure parents can relate to this. I'm not a parent, but if I was, I have a dog who was a puppy at one time who required things of me that I didn't feel like doing. But if you're a parent, I'm sure there's been times where your kids needed something, or they were sick, or you were sick, and it felt like, how am I going to do this? But you find the will, right? You find the will to just take that next step. And so don't let your mind overwhelm you with I have to do 10 things to be healthy and have energy. Just pick one, right? Pick the one, and what's that next logical piece for you, and just focus there, right? It's like people who run marathons. If they think about the entire distance the entire time and they're stressing about it and they're worried about it, they're probably not going to do so well. But if they just focus on that next mile or that next kilometer, right, or that next minute, of the race, it breaks it down to feel a whole lot more manageable. And so for me, if you're feeling really beaten down, you're feeling a low energy, you're feeling a little bit foggy, number one, in most cases, get some kind of help, right? See somebody, reach out to a practitioner, a doctor, a nutritionist, etc. Find somebody who can bring clarity to your situation, right? Who can help you to identify what's likely at the root of what's going on, right? That's going to be a lot easier than just blindly trying different things. And it's likely going to accelerate you towards feeling better. So that's number one. It's like, get some support in your corner, right? Reach out for help, get some level of support, and let people know that you're struggling and you need help. Which is in itself not easy to do. And yet, again, it's like, get over yourself, put your pride to the side, and just be real and be honest, and watch how much better things can get when you do that, when you practice that. But for me, it comes down to, again, the biggest kind of needle movers are going to be things like sleep, hydration, and then nutrition. So if someone can just increase the amount of good quality water they're getting, decrease the amount of late night or late in the evening stimulation, so they can wind down a little bit sooner and get some more quality sleep. And then I will often use things like, B vitamins, adaptogenic herbs, things like cordyceps, things like rhodiola, things like ginseng of various kinds, because they tend to be supportive to the energy, supportive to the body and the brain, but without the crash of like caffeine, which is another big red flag for people. If you're feeling run down and burnt out, eliminating caffeine as much as you possibly can, at least for a period of time, to allow your system to rebuild naturally, tends to be super supportive. I know I've had people who they feel like, they tell me, I can't start my day without coffee. How am I going to start my day without coffee? And I tell them, believe me, your body does not have like a coffee deficiency, right? In fact, it's probably dehydrated because of all this coffee you've been having for so long. So just give yourself a weekend to feel like crap, to have the headaches, to go through the withdrawal. Make sure you're hydrating yourself a ton during that time. Maybe take half an aspirin if your headache gets too intense. I also like to throw in, green juice, cucumber juice, celery juice. Those kinds of things can be really, really effective for feeling energized and clear without stimulation. And you'll find within like 2, 3, maybe 5 days, that you have more energy than you did when you were on the coffee every day. And so it's this illusion that stimulants give us energy, when really what they give us is a temporary hit of like stress hormone production, which gives us a bit of that, sometimes, puts us into fight or flight, right? It's like overstimulating, it's too much. And then we tend to have a crash afterwards. And then we go back and reach for more. And so trusting that your body is designed to be able to produce its own energy when you give it what it actually wants, right? So when you stop stressing yourself over with lack of sleep, dehydration, stimulation, and just give yourself the opportunity to see, okay, if I bring in some supportive herbs, some supportive nutrients, and really make sure that I'm hydrating and resting a little bit more, how might I feel then, right? And run it as an experiment. Give yourself a week. And I would be surprised if by the end of that week, you don't feel a whole lot better than you did previously when you were hooked on the stimulation roller coaster.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I just don't think that in today's modern world, any of us have a deficiency of stimulants, right? We are so overstimulated in so many ways. We're all under a huge amount of stress, I would say, just from our modern day living. And then, we have a huge amount of stimulation. So I agree that trying to reduce stimulants can be incredibly helpful. Difficult to do initially, but yeah, really, really helpful. I wanted to ask about, one of the things you mentioned there, which was reaching out for help. And I think sometimes for men, this can be a little tricky. I think men often have to, or often feel they need to be strong and self-sufficient. Tell me what your experience with this is.
Yeah. And so, again, it's like, it's an amazing gift to be able to go through something hard and to remain, intact, and to remain strong, and to not break down or crumble under that stress, right? That's a gift. That's a something to be, in the right context, something to be applauded, right? It's a beautiful feat of human persistence and the strength of the human will. And like pretty much everything, if done to the extreme, can actually end up harming you. And so I know for myself, there's been times where I just felt like broken. I felt like, am I broken? Is this permanent? Is this just me? Is something wrong with me? Like, what's going on? And if you don't check yourself and really question those thoughts, you can end up in a very dark place. And you can end up in a place where you think, this is permanent. There's no hope. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing anybody else can do. I'm not even, I couldn't even share this with anybody else because it'd be too hard on them, is often a story that I hear. And so I just have to like keep this together and hold it together and just, make the best of it, which is really killing yourself slowly. Um, and so it's a reminder, and I can say it as many times as, or whoever can say it, that, asking for help is a sign of strength. It's a sign of intelligence, right? Even if you want to get away from the word strong and weak, right? It's just intelligent when you've got a problem that you can't handle, right? It's like, don't be an idiot, right? And I tell this to my guys, I'm like, don't be an idiot, or like, don't make stupid decisions, right? Because I'm not trying to imply that you are stupid, but that you're behaving in a stupid manner. And I've been there myself. I've been with some very stupid decisions, and I've neglected asking for help until it was way, way, way down the line. And so it's like, people are, in most cases, right? And I can't speak to everyone's dynamic. In most cases, when you're honest and you're real and you tell someone, this is very hard for me, but I've been struggling with such and such, or I really feel like I need some help. Um, Most times people are going to be very supportive. They're going to say, "Oh my God, I had no idea." Right?
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. Right? Especially if it's like your wife or your partner. Say, "Thank you for telling me." Right? Now I know. Now I know you're not just some, you know, unplugged, cold, asshole who's been like pretending things are okay when they're not. And so, thank you for being honest. Honesty is obviously key in all relationships if they're going to work and thrive, and be healthy. And so it's like, leaning into being honest as the the intelligent, wise, supportive, and ultimately, in support of you being at your best decision, regardless of what your mind might tell you or what other examples you may have seen growing up. Because I know a lot of, probably my parents' generation and their parents' generation and the generations of the world wars, etc., the culture was just not ready for that amount of honesty, and that amount of openness. And so a lot of people just, it wasn't even an option, right? They would rather die than ask for help, or rather die than admit they've been struggling with something,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. And luckily we're in a very different time now, where there's a, a growing awareness of these things, and a growing awareness that it's just, we can't do it on our own, and we're not designed to go through these things by ourselves, right? We are social creatures, and we need each other, and we benefit tremendously when we have that sense of support in our relationships. And so it's really, I think the biggest thing is checking your pride and checking your ego to recognize that even if someone were to make fun of you or to ridicule you or to say, "Oh, you're weak," or "Oh, you're a whatever," that's them. That's their story. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't have to mean anything in regards to yourself. And until you give yourself the opportunity to take that risk, or what feels like a risk, and share something that feels a little bit, uneasy, or a little bit, could be actually terrifying to share, until you take that risk, you're never going to know. You're never going to know. And just to wrap this up, I was at the first most visceral experience of this that I can remember was back in 2014. I was at a retreat, and kind of the context of the retreat was both health and adventure, personal development, but also through this context of radical honesty, which is actually a fantastic book by Brad Blanton, if people haven't read it or listened to the audio, which is quite hilarious. But radical honesty. And that was sort of the context of this retreat. And so one of the first exercises they had us do was talk for 2 minutes without stopping about the thing you least want to share with this group of new strangers that you're going to be spending the next 4 days with. And I went into at the time, extremely embarrassing story about regrettable, unprotected sex that I had had and all the stress that had caused me. And why did I do that? And this whole thing. And funnily enough, nobody, ridiculed me. Nobody thought, what's wrong with you? Get out of here. After that experience, for the most part, it brought the group together. And we realized, oh, we all just let go of these masks that we've been wearing. And now we can trust each other because we're being real. And so, yeah, I would say lean into that discomfort when you feel like sharing something, when you know there's something that needs to be shared, but there's also this kind of like, a lock or clamp down that you've been repressing that. To lean into that and to give that the time of day is one of the most liberating things you could ever give yourself.
I agree, and I think it does deepen relationships enormously. Um, but I think what's also important is tribe. Finding
Mm.
the right tribe of people who are on a similar mission and who have similar values. And I think, in that sense, especially for men, I think it's really important to find a tribe of people who they can really connect with, who are, all trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like that the whole idea of radical honesty. It's probably not, if you're struggling with something that's really important to you, probably don't bring that to like, poker night, right? Or a place where everyone's drinking beer and not in a very conscious and coherent state. Um, and luckily, again, in the modern world, we can find men's groups, meetup groups, personal
Or,
development workshops, health workshops.
yeah,
Anything in those categories is likely to introduce you to a group of people who are like-minded, who are not judgmental, who are supportive, who are on their own journey, right? They get it. They've been there. They've been through that stuff. And they're going to be able to, with more grace and more support, hold you and support you and witness you, which many times all you need to really have is to be heard and to be seen, and to know that you're just fine the way you are, right? There's nothing broken or wrong or um, shameful about you as a human being or as a man. And you're going to find that when that's your intention, when you're like, okay, I want to find some people like this. I have no doubt that you will be led through whatever event or this or that. You'll find those people, and it'll likely be a very refreshing change to the kinds of relationships you may have been used to up until that time. Where you can actually go deeper with folks, and they want to go deeper because that's where so much of the richness of life is really found.
yeah, absolutely. And I think also the I just tend to find that the people that you form your friendships with very much determine also your own behaviors and things as well. So, I encourage people to, I'm not saying drop your old friends, but what I am saying is forge friendships with people who have, are trying to do the same thing, trying to build health and foster well-being and health. And I think that's a really a great way to keep you almost accountable as well.
Oh yeah. One, and it ties back into this idea of like sustainability and fun, right? Like I think the reason why pickleball is the world's fastest growing sport is because first of all, it's very fun and it's very easy to get into. And second of all, it's social, right? So you're there, you're having fun, you're moving your body. You don't have to, anyone I know who loves pickleball, I don't have to convince them to go play pickleball. They just wake up and they want to go play, right? And so it's the same thing when you have friends who wake up and they want to go bike ride or they want to go hike up the mountain or they want to go swim in the river, right? It makes it so much easier to do those things that otherwise you're like, you have to just like, okay, I got to go do that thing. I got to go do that thing. And it sucks all the joy out of what could be a really really satisfying and fun, health adventure.
Mm. I agree. I agree. Um, Bryan, tell me a little bit about the men that you work with and the work that you do.
Yeah. So a lot of the guys, as you might have guessed, based on my story of digestive issues and energy issues and, recovery issues, a lot of the guys that come to me are dealing with something of that nature. They're usually pretty, high achieving, driven individuals. Many times they're established in their work. They often have a family, they're fathers, etc. And now they're at a place where, as you described, they've lost that kind of spark. Things are kind of aching and not feeling so great. They don't digest their food so well. And they know that there's more for them, right? They know that this is not the way it has to be. And they're at a place where they've got the resources and the time to start to pour back into themselves, right? Many times the first 30 or 40 years of their life has been very career focused, family focused, etc., which is beautiful. And they've given a lot in order to get to where they are. But also their health has taken a toll in that process. And so they're now at a place where they have the opportunity to kind of reverse that cycle and start to pour into themselves, because they can see that if I'm going to live and live well into my 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, something's got to change, right? And it's up to me to take that on and to really invest in my health like it matters, and like it is the true wealth that it truly is, right? Because you could have everything else in the world, all the money, all the relationships, all the friends, the lovers, the fancy things, but if your health is not intact, if you are in pain, if you're struggling, if you feel like crap, none of that other stuff matters, right? You can't enjoy anything else in life if your health is chronically beating down on you. And so that's typically the kind of guys who come to me. They're either like they want to go from okay to great, or in some cases they are coming with colitis, Crohn's, IBS, something a bit more severe in terms of what's happening. But they know there's more, and they also they don't want to go like medication and surgery as a primary route. They want to see what their body is capable of first, because they tend to have this innate knowing that you know it's not natural to need those drugs or to need those surgeries. It doesn't make sense to them. To them, they feel like my body should be capable of, feeling better. And so what do I have to do? What are the things I have to do or stop doing in order to make that happen?
Yeah. So I don't very often share my own story, but when I was 26, I developed Crohn's. And it massively impacted on every aspect of my life. But in the years leading up to it, I had experienced quite significant depression.
Mm.
And couldn't figure out why. Here I am in my 20s. Everything's good on the surface, work, friendships, relationships, and yet I'm depressed. And I think for me, I felt a lot of confusion and guilt, and why I'm feeling this way. And it took I think years for me to discover. So very much like you, my health journey really my life journey pivoted as a result of my health. And it took me a long time to figure out that what I'd experienced mentally was actually as a result of my gut. So, I do think that very often um, that brain gut connection is just so critical to well-being, even if people don't have really serious GI issues, autoimmune issues, or anything like that. The gut just plays such a huge role on how mentally well we feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So you said you have a resource for testosterone. How can people access that?
Yeah. So if you go to revitalizedman.com, which is my website, revitalized man with a Z, as we would say in Canada, or a Z, revitalized with a Z, man.com/guide. There you'll find my testosterone cheat sheets, I call them, because I've taken a whole bunch of things on the do not do list and on the do list, like do this, don't do this, from a whole bunch of research and personal experimentation and client experimentation, and simplified it into just a couple pages, right? And so go in there, grab it, and just pick a few things, right? A few basic things you can start with, and then over time you can layer on more and more. And many guys find that just that alone gives them a 20, 30% boost in how they're feeling. without having to, do anything dramatic or drastic. And so that's all there for, those listening who want to get some practical action steps that they can take from this conversation and actually apply and start to feel better, without having to wait weeks and weeks or months or go on medication or whatever. Like, start with the simple natural things and build from there.
Absolutely. That's great. And you work with groups as well?
I have a group that I facilitate. And I mean, I'm always open to speaking with groups, to, presenting, sharing ideas. And I have a group that I run called the Vital Life Brotherhood, which is a small group. It's really focused on like the core nutritional and lifestyle things that we can be doing to move ourselves into a better place. So yeah, that is also a resource that I've got and part of the things that I offer. And if anyone's interested in that, you can find information through emailing me or getting in contact with me through my website. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of, but I'd be happy to talk about it.
Great. We'll pop some links into the bottom of this podcast as well. But it's been wonderful having you on today. It's been a really fun conversation. And I'm very sure that it's going to reach quite a lot of people out there.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Charmaine. This has been great. I always love an opportunity to share, even if the mosquitoes are trying to get in my way. We made it through, and I feel like we covered some really, really important things. And so thank you for having me on. And yeah, for everyone listening, thank you for being here and for caring about your health and for investing in your health. It is so, so important. And it doesn't just affect you, right? It ripples out into the world. And so anyone who's taking those steps, no matter how big or small, I applaud you and I see you and I celebrate you. And yeah, let's keep it going.
Absolutely. And don't forget to share this with anyone you feel might benefit from listening.
Totally.
Take care.
Bye-bye.